Welcome back to Ancient Echoes, where the loudest stories often come from the quietest ruins. I'm Chelsea, and in this episode we're leaving the marble of Rome behind, and we're stepping in even further back in time, into the shadows of Mesoamerica's deep past, into the civilization that scholars often call the mother culture of the region, the Olmecs. The Olmecs are one of the oldest known civilizations in the Americas, flourishing from around 1600 to 400 BC, long before the Maya raised their pyramids or the Aztecs built Teotihuacan. And yet, we still don't fully understand them. There's no written histories, no epic poems, no engraved chronicles of kings. What they left behind instead was stone, monuments, altars, colossal heads, massive expressions of power carved with stunning precision and near total silence. In this episode, we'll explore who the Olmecs were, how we found them, and what we think they believed, built, and traded, and how they shaped the cultures that followed. We'll also talk about the mystery of it all, because for every answer archaeology has uncovered, there are just as many questions still embedded in the jungle. So let's begin, not with a name, but with a face. A face carved in stone, staring out from the earth, reminding us that sometimes the greatest empires leave behind everything except a voice. For centuries, the Olmecs weren't lost. They were invisible. They didn't disappear in a dramatic fall, they simply faded into the landscape, their cities swallowed by time and jungle. Their memory folded into the mythologies of the cultures that came after. And it wasn't until the mid-19th century that the modern world stumbled, quite literally, into the remnants of their greatness. It began with a face, a very, very large face. In 1897, Mexican engineer Ismael Loya was mapping the volcano Martin Pajapan when he came across a massive stone head buried in the earth. It measured nearly 6 feet tall, weighed several tons, and had distinct features: thick lips, a flat nose, and a helmet-like headdress. It didn't look Maya. It wasn't Aztec. And for a long time, no one was quite sure what to make of it. Because when you find a 10-ton stone face in the middle of nowhere, the natural human response is, "That's weird," followed by, "Let's not deal with that today." But the mystery remained. Who carved it? When? And why? Fast forward to 1925, when Bloom and Lafarge from Tulane University ventured to the area in search of this colossal head that they had heard talk of. They arrived completely unprepared for the adventure that awaited them. Cue book nerds traipsing through the untamed tropical jungle. What could go wrong? First, they arrive in Tacapa. It's a small village, which had recently killed a group of rebels for being obnoxious, and there was extreme concern when 2 strangers walked into town. Not the warm welcome Bloom and Lafarge were looking for. However, once the villagers discovered they were not there seeking justice for the group of rebels they killed, and instead were just looking for a giant head, they welcomed the academics with open arms. They even gave them guides to help them. Next, the 2 descended into Piedra Labrada, which is another small town in the area, with their guides. What they found? A town that had burned to the ground and was still smoldering. Of course, this would be the perfect time for a thunderstorm, so they hung up their hammocks outside of the town and hunkered down for the night. As a side note, their guides would not enter the burned village as it was a bad omen, and they kind of quit on them. The next day, a farmer and his son decided to take Bloom and Lafarge to the sites they were looking for. What they discovered was not Mayan like they had suspected, but something distinctly different. They couldn't stay and investigate further. They were overcome by heat exhaustion and relentless insect attacks. They left to recover and convalesce. You might think that's the end of them, but no. They pressed on and took things even further on their quest. They truly were the modern Don Quixote and Sancho Panza. After hearing rumors, while they recovered of an ancient city in the swampy jungle, they decided to rent a sailboat and travel south up the Tonla River. They had to abandon the sailboat for reasons that were, shall we say, less than documented, so they walked straight through the swamp and discovered La Venta. Not what they were looking for, but exactly what the archaeological record had been missing. A farmer and his family showed them around the different mounds in the field, and they realized that they had found a previously unknown ancient city. And that's it. The exit stage left, and nothing happened for another decade. It wasn't until the 1930s and 40s that someone came back to listen. Enter Matthew Sterling, archaeologist, jungle veteran, and the man who would finally put the Olmecs on the historical map. He and his wife Marion, more on her later, she's very important to this story, began more systematic excavations at Tres Sabotes in December of 1938, continuing through April of 1939, because this was the dry season. During their first season, they uncovered a carved stone stela, which they preliminary dated to 31 BC. In their second season, they were joined by Philip Drucker, who helped negotiate with local unions to gain access to the sites and ensure fair wages for a rotating team of local workers. This boosted the local economy, which is exactly what they needed. Toward the end of their second digging season, Marion, understandably, begged Matt for a romantic vacation because, as it turns out, spending months at a humid jungle dig site wasn't quite the dreamy getaway she'd envisioned. Matt, the romantic, suggested a camping trip, and none other than La Venta. I'm sure she swooned immediately. So off they went, following once again in the soggy footsteps of Bloom and Lafarge. They rented a sailboat, abandoned said sailboat for reasons that remain characteristically underexplained, trudged through the swamp, and eventually reached La Venta for what we'll call a memorable getaway. And while the trip may have lacked in candlelit dinners or towel service, it accomplished something far more important. Marion and Matt created the first complete map of the La Venta site, a crucial record made just in time, before oil prospectors destroyed parts of it in the years that followed, before it finally became a protected archaeological zone. It wasn't until 1942 that archaeologists were finally able to gather the funding, permits, and team needed to begin excavations at La Venta. What they uncovered, before being shut down in 1943 due to World War II, was immense. Burial sites and a tomb, a sandstone sarcophagus carved with a crocodile motif, jade jewelry, stingray spines, both real and handcrafted, shark teeth, jade and green serpentine figures, a jaguar mosaic made from green serpentine, and several mysterious pseudo-burials, which were elaborate offerings arranged to resemble human interments. Not bad for an interrupted dig. After the war, in 1945, Marion re-enters the picture. This time thanks to a lead from her business partner, a crocodile hunter supplying hides for her high-end leather purse business. He stumbled across something unusual, a giant head in the jungle. Naturally, Marion and Matt packed up and headed for San Lorenzo, where they documented not only the head, but jaguar statues and the remains of a sophisticated aqueduct system, evidence of an advanced urban center. Excavations resumed in 1946 with Sterling and Drucker returning to the site, but the sheer scale of San Lorenzo proved overwhelming. They uncovered little more that season, not due to lack of effort, but because the site was vast and complex. A reminder that sometimes the biggest discoveries are buried beneath years of groundwork. All digging paused again until 1955, when Drucker assembled a new team and returned to La Venta. What they found this time was astonishing. Monumental architecture, including 3 massive offering pits lined with serpentine blocks, buried with ritual precision and geometric intention. A massive pyramid which is one of the oldest known in Mesoamerica. Altars, jade figurines, and ceremonial axes. And all of this predated the Maya by centuries. This wasn't just a ceremonial site. This was a lost civilization. What stunned archaeologists most wasn't just the sophistication of the sites, it was the age. Carbon dating and stylistic analysis placed the height of Olmec civilization between 1600 and 400 BC. That made them older than the classical Maya, older than Tehuantepec, and a cultural predecessor to nearly every major Mesoamerican empire. Suddenly, those giant stone heads weren't anomalies. They were cornerstones, part of a vast cultural blueprint that shaped what followed. In other words, while history books focused on the flashy imperial headlines, the Olmecs were the quiet footnote that turned out to be the opening chapter. Here's where it gets a little awkward. The name Olmec isn't what they called themselves. It comes from the Nahuatl term Olmeca, meaning rubber people, used by the Aztecs to refer to people in the Gulf Coast region. The civilization we call Olmec was long gone by the time the Aztecs appeared, but the name stuck, thanks to colonial-era ethnography and a convenient academic shorthand. So yes, the term is a little misleading, but given the lack of any written Olmec records, it's the best we've got. It's like assigning someone a nickname based on their leftovers, but archaeologically speaking. They never introduced themselves, but their legacy spoke first and loud enough to echo through time. So why do the Olmecs matter? The rediscovery of the Olmecs forced scholars to rethink the timeline of Mesoamerican history. They weren't just an early culture, they were the first major civilization in the region. They built cities, shaped mythologies, developed trade networks, and carved artistic tradition that would echo through the Maya, the Zapotec, the Aztec, and beyond. And yet, they left no written records, no names, no king lists, no epic poems, only stone, which means the Olmecs didn't tell us their story. We had to dig it out one artifact at a time. Next, we'll step inside those silent cities and see what the monuments can tell us about power, ceremony, and how to build an empire that doesn't need to shout to make itself heard. Up next, how the Olmecs ruled, what they built, and what their cities revealed about a culture that shaped a continent. The Olmecs didn't build in anonymity, they built to be seen, but they didn't explain themselves, not in writing, not in inscriptions. Instead, they left cities, monuments, and artifacts that speak with precision, planning, and yes, a certain kind of silent authority. Because when you don't have a written language, but people are still talking about your head sculpture 3,000 years later, you've made your point. Let's take a closer look at the places where the case is still being made. First, we'll look at San Lorenzo, the first great city. San Lorenzo is considered the earliest major Olmec center and possibly the oldest city in all of Mesoamerica. San Lorenzo's development can be tracked across several phases. From 1500 to 1350 BC, or the Ohochit phase, small hamlets relying on slash-and-burn agriculture were utilized. The Olmecs were still testing out the landscape, and civilization was just beginning to take root. Between 1350 to 1250 BC, or the Bajío phase, population increased. The Olmecs began leveling plateaus to create sacred and civic space. In other words, they were remodeling the earth. Then we have 1250 to 1150 BC, the Chicharas phase. There's more buildings, there's more people, and now, for the first time, pottery and figurines that look distinctly Olmec, with those downturned mouths, almond eyes, and jaguar-like features we now recognize. Between 1150 and 900 BC, it's known as the San Lorenzo phase proper. This is when it all comes together. Stone monuments, colossal heads, and ceremonial platforms rise. San Lorenzo becomes the power center of the Olmec world. From 900 to 700 BC, or the Nakaste period, they just walk away. San Lorenzo is abandoned, no clear reason, no collapse, just silence. It's the Olmec version of thanks for attending, we'll see ourselves out. Starting in 600 to 400 BC, we have the Palangana phase. Pottery from this period resembles that of Venta, suggesting cultural continuity or migration eastward potentially. But perhaps the most stunning discovery at San Lorenzo is the ilmenite cube beads, which are small, highly polished pieces of iron ore that were likely used in drilling technology or even as ball bearings. They found 4,400 pounds in one area, 350 pounds in another, and 5,500 pounds in a third. That's not ornamental, that's industrial. The Olmecs weren't just shaping stone, they were mastering materials. When San Lorenzo fades, Venta rises, built not on hills, but on swampy terrain. The Olmecs didn't see the marshes as a problem. They saw them as an opportunity and created raised fields, sophisticated for their time, sustained by corn, cultivated as early as 5000 BC, manioc around 4000 BC, and even domesticated sunflowers by 2000 BC. Venta is home to one of the oldest pyramids in Mesoamerica, massive and meticulously aligned with celestial events. And nearby, a ritual complex where serpentine blocks were arranged in symmetrical patterns and buried under ceremonial platforms. This wasn't just engineering, it was cosmic architecture. Then let's move on to El Manatí. Discovered in 1987, thanks to locals digging fish ponds, El Manatí is not a city, but a ritual spring, offering a glimpse into Olmec ceremonial life. Inside the sacred waters, archaeologists found 38 wooden busts preserved by the spring's chemistry, 19 rubber balls tied to the Mesoamerican ballgame, 353 greenstone celts, beads, figurines, and the remains of infants, carefully placed and notably showing no signs of trauma, probably stillborn babies. This wasn't a sacrifice, it was an offering. The Olmecs weren't just building above ground, they were giving gifts back to the earth. Next, found in 1991, Llana del Jacaro was a quarry site, and not just for stone blocks. Here, archaeologists found unfinished sculptures, frozen mid-process. It's the closest thing we have to a behind-the-scenes look at Olmec artistry. And last but not least, La Isla. La Isla features jaguar statues unmistakably Olmec in design. El Azuzul reveals anthropomorphic statues arranged in scenes possibly depicting ritual or myth, human and feline merged into symbolic form. Each site adds nuance. Each one reinforces a truth. The Olmecs didn't just carve art, they carved meaning and then placed it in specific positions on specific land tied to specific rituals. Of course, the most iconic Olmec creations are the colossal heads, monumental sculptures carved from basalt, standing 5 to 11 feet tall, weighing up to 50 tons. There are at least 17 known heads, each with unique facial features and helmet-like headdresses. Most scholars agree these weren't generic, they were portraits of rulers. Their expressions are calm, stoic, watchful. Their size? Unmistakably deliberate. Those weren't just decorative, they were declarations. Power sees you, always. Transporting them required quarrying basalt from places like Llana del Jacaro and floating it downriver and carving it with obsidian tools, an effort so extreme it practically shouts, "Yes, we can move mountains. We're the ones in charge." It's like putting your face on a billboard, but instead of paper, it's volcanic rock, And instead of advertising soap, you're advertising divinely sanctioned rule. Alongside the heads are massive monolithic altars, or possibly thrones. Some are carved with serpents, caves, and figures emerging from the earth. They weren't just ceremonial platforms. They were narratives in stone, depictions of rulers as intermediaries between the human and spiritual realm. Whether seated or rising, these figures imply a deeper truth. Rulers didn't just govern, they embodied sacred origins, born from the land, aligned with rivers, emerged from caves. It wasn't just rule, it was cosmic legitimacy. The Olmecs left no known written language, but their silence wasn't a gap, it was a strategy. They communicated through symmetry, iconography, scale, and the deliberate placement of objects in ritual space. Their messages weren't written down, they were carved, stacked, and aligned. The cities like San Lorenzo, Venta, Manatí, and beyond weren't just settlements, they were living texts, composed in stone, ritual, space. What they lacked in words, they made up for in vision. Geometric, mythic, and powerfully human. Next, we'll turn to movement, how the Olmecs traded ideas, tracked the stars, and left behind the tools that would shape civilizations to come, which, if we're honest, is a more durable form of leadership than most tweets. If the colossal heads were a statement of Olmec authority, and the ceremonial centers a map of cosmic order, then trade and timekeeping were how they moved their message across space, across generations. The Olmecs weren't just spiritual architects, they were cultural engineers, and the world they built would quietly become the blueprint for everything that followed. But they also did something perhaps even more impressive. They laid the cultural foundation for an entire region without ever being an empire. That's right, no conquest, no taxation system, no administrative bureaucracy, and yet somehow everyone from the Maya to the Aztec borrowed their aesthetic. Let's take a closer look at how they did it. The Olmecs may not have marched into neighboring regions with armies, but their influence spread widely, thanks to an expansive trade network and a reputation for highly valued goods. Among their most prized materials is jadeite, which was carved into beads, celts, and ritual masks, obsidian, a volcanic glass used for tools, blades, and ceremonial mirrors, hematite and ilmenite, which were polished into reflective surfaces or used in compass-like orientation tools. These weren't just functional, they were sacred commodities, and their presence at distant sites indicates that Olmecs traded far beyond the Gulf Coast. Think of it as spiritual soft power, less empire, more artisan export economy. And don't forget the greenstone celts at Manatí, over 350 of them buried as offerings. These were prestige goods with religious weight, not just trade items, but ritual currency. While the Olmecs didn't leave behind a deciphered writing system, we do have symbols carved into stelae and portable objects, glyph-like, repeated, and deliberate. Are they proto-writing? Possibly. Did they influence later scripts like Zapotec and Maya glyphs? Very likely. The Olmecs didn't leave us a written language we can read, but they did leave behind something just as powerful, a system of time. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Olmecs used two separate calendar systems, and both played different roles in their daily life and rituals. The first was a 360-day calendar, likely used for agricultural planning. It helped structure planting, harvesting, and seasonal rituals tied to fertility of the land. The second was the 260-day sacred calendar, later used by the Maya and other Mesoamerican cultures, but it seems the Olmecs were the first. This calendar wasn't about corn or rainfall, it was tied to something even more fundamental, the human body. 260 days, roughly the length of a human gestation. That made it a fertility calendar, used to guide naming rituals, ceremonial timing, and even spiritual readings related to birth and destiny. So yes, the Olmecs were tracking both the planting of seeds and the growing of people. Together, these calendars formed a kind of cosmic clockwork. One measured the body, the other the earth. And in doing so, they didn't just track time, they gave it meaning. Time wasn't something you passed, it was something you aligned with. Think less what day is it, and more what kind of day is it, cosmically speaking. The legacy of these two calendars can be traced in later Mesoamerican societies, but the foundations appear here, with the Olmecs. They weren't just measuring hours, they were mapping human life onto the rhythms of the cosmos. By the time the Maya and Aztec enter the historical record, many of the practices we associate with them are already visible in Olmec form. Monumental architecture, urban planning with sacred alignment, jaguar iconography and hybrid deities, ball courts and ritual sport, cosmology dividing the world into upper, middle, and underworld realms. Even the role of the shaman ruler, mediating between human and divine, can be traced back to the Olmec thrones and figurines. And yet the Olmecs never forced these ideas on others. They didn't colonize, they simply created something so powerful, something so beautifully symbolic that later civilizations adopted and expanded it. That's not cultural diffusion, it's cultural gravity. So while the Olmecs are often called the mother culture of Mesoamerica, it might be more accurate to say that they were the original architects of cultural memory. Their roads weren't paved, their cities weren't built to last, but their ideas endured. Next, we'll confront the silence itself, what we don't know about the Olmecs, and why that absence might be their most lasting contribution of all. For all the monuments, maps, the masks, and the mirrored serpentine blocks, the Olmecs still leave us with one lingering impression: silence. There's no epic poem, no royal inscription, no codex written in glyphs we've cracked. Even their name, as we've said, is a borrowed one. We don't know what they called themselves. We don't know who ruled them. We don't know how they imagined their own legacy, and yet we still feel it. We don't know where many Olmec rulers were buried. We don't know exactly why San Lorenzo was abandoned. We don't know how decisions were made or whether they thought of themselves as a single people at all. It's not that they didn't leave anything behind, they did, but they left it in materials, not manuscripts. They told their stories through monument placement, city orientation, offerings buried in sacred waters, and symbolism carved into basalt and greenstones. This is a civilization that communicated through presence, but that presence is partial, scattered, and in many cases still buried. When we study ancient cultures, especially ones like the Olmecs, it's tempting to fill in the blanks. We want clear motives. We want stories with beginnings, middles, and ends. We want to plug in a myth, a god, or a convenient political structure. But history doesn't always play along. And the best scholars know that "we don't know yet" is a more honest answer than anything that sounds too neat. Because when mystery is part of the source material, speculation is not a shortcut. It's a liability. What makes the Olmecs powerful isn't just what they built, it's what they left us to figure out. Their influence is felt across centuries, not because they demanded it, but because what they created was resonant, mysterious, durable, symbolically rich. Their silence forces us to work harder, to think more carefully, to interpret rather than assume. And in that way, made us better historians, because they remind us that history isn't just about what's been said, it's about listening closely to what hasn't. So, what don't we know? Quite a bit, but maybe that's part of their legacy too. A culture that left behind no names, but sculpted itself into the earth with enough conviction that we're still trying to read the message, even if we'll never hear it spoken aloud. And as we reflect, we'll take a step back and ask, what does it mean to study a civilization that never properly introduced itself, but still shaped everything that came after? We remember civilizations through what they leave behind: temples, texts, timelines. But the Olmecs left us something different. They left presence without explanation: a face carved in volcanic stone, a pyramid aligned with stars, a rubber ball worn smooth by ritual use. And a silence that doesn't mean nothing was said, it just means that we weren't there to hear it. They didn't build an empire, they didn't wage massive wars, they didn't write their victories in stone or preserve their laws in scrolls. They spoke instead through stone, through ritual, through carefully aligned cities, and offerings placed where water still remembers. And somehow that's been enough. They set the tone for everything that came after. They gave Mesoamerica its cosmic structure. They gave later civilizations a calendar, a court, in a sense that the land itself was sacred. They carved their influence into the earth and then stepped aside. We don't know their names. We don't know their myths. But we can feel their influence in every corner of Mesoamerican culture. And maybe that's the deeper legacy. A culture that never shouted, never claimed credit, never preserved its rulers in ink or stone, and yet still lingers, quietly, defiantly beneath the jungle, inside the mountains, and at the bottom of sacred springs. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the Olmec world. If this episode left you with more questions than answers, good. That's how real discovery works. If you enjoyed the episode, consider sharing it with a friend who loves history, and be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. Next time on Ancient Echoes, we will continue to examine ancient cultures from around the globe. Until then, may your questions stay sharp, your interpretations stay humble, and your silences be full of meaning.